Good evening, everyone. It's just gone past. I think most people have come in, and I should start as timely as I can. I am Gillian Leng. I am the president here at the Royal Society of Medicine, so I'm delighted to welcome you all to the building. Is there anyone who has never been to the RSM before? There are some new people. Excellent. Well, please do come again. It's a great place to be, great place to meet people. And for those of you who are fellows, members, regulars, great to see you back here again. I have to do the usual housekeeping things. I have to tell you there's no fire drill, so if the fire alarm goes off, don't panic. Follow the green lights at the front and the back and make your way out of the building in an orderly fashion. If you feel unwell, let someone know. The reception desk will find a doctor. We should manage that, I hope. And the main event this evening is the awarding of the gold medal to Dame Nancy Rothwell, and of course then listening to her lecture. But we're going to begin with the citation for Nancy. So, I'm absolutely delighted to be here giving the citation for Dame Nancy Rothwell. She has, by all accounts, had a stellar scientific career as a leading researcher, as a vice-chancellor, and importantly, and perhaps most importantly, as someone who has invested significant energy and effort in communicating science to the public. Not always an easy thing to do, but a really important thing to do. Let's start by going back in time somewhat, and I won't say how long, to Nancy's school days. She took a somewhat unusual choice of studying art alongside 3 science A-levels. Always good to buck the trend, I think. And although she finally decided against a career in art, she became able to be quite a dab hand at drawing cartoons, which was a useful financial sideline, helping on the income front while she was a student in London. So in London, Nancy studied physiology and obviously learnt about physiology, but also the importance of scientific questioning. And science really is all about formulating questions and then testing and retesting to try to answer those questions you started out with. And her early research was into obesity and the role of brown fat, which interestingly is coming back into discussion these days. And the research featured on the BBC's Horizon programme in the 1970s. And this was an early foray into science communication. Nancy then moved from weight gain into weight loss and what might be the cause in certain conditions, such as in cancer patients, which could perhaps all be put down to a metabolic error. And now working in Manchester, Nancy became interested in stroke and brain damage and looking at the impact on metabolism. She found some unexpected results, and as a consequence, people didn't readily believe what she'd found, but the research was so exciting that Nancy then moved into brain research. And I think would acknowledge the benefits of changing fields, something few of us are brave enough to do, but it can be hugely refreshing and bring an important new perspective. In 1998, Nancy was invited to give the Royal Institution Christmas lectures and chose the title, The Secrets of Life, and talked about how the body works, including how it copes with various stresses and strains, heat and cold, and how it still stays in balance. These are aimed primarily at children, and the lectures illustrated brilliantly her skill as a great explainer. I watched some of them in preparation for this citation. It's amazing what you can find online these days, and it's great to be able to just look back and see these lectures. And I particularly liked the illustration of a real egg cooking on a simulated bed of Saharan sand. Nancy has said that these lectures were the toughest thing in her career. But it was clearly worthwhile, as she received letters afterwards from people saying how it had changed their lives, turned them into a science career, changed their futures. Nancy became the President and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Manchester in 2010. She was the first woman to hold that role, and it was a role she initially had some reluctance to accept, but she changed her mind, in part because she didn't want anyone else to come along and not do a good job. Seems an excellent reason to me. In that role, Nancy has reflected that the politics can be challenging. Politics, I imagine, with both a small and a large P, because she did sometimes have to engage with senior politicians and learnt that scientific evidence presented to Cabinet can't always be acted upon, even when there is overt enthusiasm to follow the science, especially in particularly controversial areas. In 2024, Nancy stepped down as Vice-Chancellor. And although she says she now has a little bit more time, she has acquired a number of other roles. And I'm not going to list them all, but she's a trustee of Cancer Research UK. She does work with the MRC, with the Royal Society, and is being kept busy with the government's new industrial strategy. So Nancy, sitting in the front row, you've had a fabulous career, which is still continuing. And please, can I invite you onto the stage for the gold medal. I think you once said, reading research is my hobby, and that's clearly stood you in good stead. So I'm delighted to be able to present you with an extremely well-deserved gold medal, and I think we should stand you over here for a suitable photograph. And I've got to get the words right, so we'll miss the microphone. All right, you can either see or hear, it's one or the other. So. Gold medal, and by virtue of the authority vested in me by Council, I now admit you to honorary fellowship of the Royal Society of Medicine. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now we'll put them back, and there's part of the process here is signing the register. So if I could just ask you to do that. We have a pen. And now I think there's going to be enough listening to me talking about Nancy. You're actually going to hear from Dame Nancy Rothwell, who's going to give this evening's Jephcott lecture. And we're very grateful to the generous funding from the Jephcott family who supports these lectures, and it makes a huge difference. So, Dame Nancy Rothwell, you're going to tell us about universities, the UK, and health. Thank you so much.
So thank you for all those incredible honours. To be invited to give this prestigious lecture, following in the footsteps of many giants, to be given the gold medal and to be appointed an honorary fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine. It really is a great honour for me indeed. So thank you, Gillian, and thank you to the Royal Society of Medicine. And by the way, I didn't pursue a career in art because my lovely art teacher said you're just not good enough to make any money at it. And that was a wise choice. So I did other things. In reflecting on what I should talk about today, I considered my research, obviously, early phase, later phases, various other roles, but I decided to choose something that's rather topical, which of course is universities. I doubt a day goes by without universities featuring in the UK press, normally in a bad way, I'm afraid. But what I'm going to do is a little bit about what I think are the value of universities in the UK, what their contribution is and should be, and also the challenges that we're facing. And then I'm going to rather bravely ask, are there any solutions, recognising that this is being recorded for transmission. So I do have to be slightly careful. I'll talk in general about UK universities, with a little bit of reference overseas, but try to focus particularly on where health comes into this, because health is such a key part of our UK universities, and indeed, of course, of our country. So just to start, a very brief history As many will know, ancient centres of learning have been around for several thousand years in the Middle East, in India and so on, but none were maintained. Indeed, it's always argued that the first true university still in existence is Bologna in 1088. Then, of course, in the UK, Oxford and Cambridge were founded in the early 1200s. Very much places of learning for wealthy men, all men, of a religious disposition. There were no further universities in England, for 600 years. There were in Scotland, but in England, Oxford and Cambridge blocked them. They didn't want any competitors, so there were no further universities. That was, of course, until the founding of some of the civic universities, largely in the 19th century and early 20th century. David Willets argues in his book, great book on university education, that this blocking of further universities by Oxbridge led to the formation of many US universities that are now our competitor. But I don't know if that's true. So the civic universities were very different. Many founded on the basis of institutions that were developed to provide the skills needed for the workforce in those regions. In the large cities, to provide engineering skills. So they were not as academic, they were tended to be more practical. And they also admitted women, and not requiring religious conviction. So there were a number of fundamental differences, but still largely places of learning. Then, of course, Humboldt in 1810 brought about the idea of universities as places of research and discovery, as well as of learning. And that started to shift things, particularly, I should say, in the civic universities. Of course, then in 1907, Cardinal Newman had the idea of a university. But things didn't change then really until the UK Robbins Report in 1963. At that time, there were 25 universities in the UK. But what followed that were the plate glass universities, Warwick, York, Lancaster, etc., under significant growth. And then later, in 1992, many of the polytechnics became universities. So things have gradually emerged, and during the Robbins Report, there were about 200,000 UK students in university. Now there are nearly 3 million. So a very different situation. And before I go on to other parts, I want to consider what universities are for. What's their purpose? This applies particularly to UK universities, which are almost all charities. And of course, when you say, what are they for, what benefit do they offer, you have to say, who for? They are, of course, places of learning, inquiry, and scholarship. They're also places of discovery, of new knowledge, and now increasingly of application of that knowledge. Importantly, in the UK, we hold very dear the principles of academic freedom and challenge, and we also hold very dear the principle of autonomy of universities. It's often argued that one of the reasons that UK universities do so well in whatever international league table you choose, and believe me, there are with some drawbacks, they do much better than European universities. And it's often argued that it's because of autonomy. Although that does bring a problem with it, because autonomy means it's hard to change them. They are independent of political, cultural, and religious differences. But that has been a real challenge to UK universities over the past few years in particular. All of us made a mistake, I think. We all came out publicly to support Ukraine after the invasion of Russia. We all felt it was the right thing to do. But it was a political statement. And actually, we should not make political statements. And now we're criticised for not making a political statement on Israel and Gaza. And had we not made a statement on Ukraine, probably that would have been significantly easier. But we should note that actually universities in the UK rank very highly in all world measures, whatever league table or other measure. For example, the latest data suggests that UK universities train 40% of world leaders. That's quite a significant contribution to global futures. But of course, and there is a very big but, they're facing huge financial challenge. I put up this picture on the right, this book written by Stefan Collini, a very thoughtful academic who I often disagree with, but I actually fully agree with his conclusion in his book, because what he concluded was that universities are for public good. That is what we are here for, whether it's through the students we train and the jobs they go on to do, through our discoveries or through our wider contributions, some of which I will go on to mention a little more in a moment. But as I say, we are under challenge at the moment. So what are the benefits of university? First of all, just to give you a quick picture of UK universities, 141, last count, could be one or two more by now, ranging from a few hundred students to almost 50,000. Many comprehensive, some very specialised. For example, colleges of music and colleges of art and so on. 46 medical schools, 16 dental schools, and 24 in the Russell Group. We have seen a decline in students studying science. Of course, it's flat in medicine because we can't take any more students. And we've seen a sharp decline in nursing. The latest data suggests that those numbers are starting to bounce back. And of course, as I'll come on to, a decline in international students, which has been a real problem. The estimate in 2021-22 was that international students bring at least 50 billion to the economy. Some would argue it's very much more than that when you take the amount of money they spend. I shall never forget talking to a Chinese student who I asked her where she lives. She said, oh, I've got an apartment in town. And I said, oh, that's lovely. Do you rent it? So, no, my mum and dad bought it. But they bought three. They bought one for me, one for my belongings, and one for us to visit. They do contribute a huge amount to economies. And that is true across every region that they come to. And some would put the figure as high as 100 billion. That's about the equivalent to the life sciences industry. And actually, Universities UK would argue that the total contribution of UK universities is very much higher indeed. But as I've said, we have major financial challenges. So, what are the benefits of universities, and who to? Students, of course. They're now paying 9,250, soon be 9,500, to staff who work in them, to the economy and society, locally and globally. So, it's still the case that a university degree, estimated recently, was worth an additional £280,000 a year over lifelong earnings to a male and £190,000 to female. But, of course, that varies enormously. You would not see that premium on some of the creative industry. You would not see that premium on some courses or on some universities. So it is extremely variable. So I asked a colleague of mine to tell me about the benefit of going to university to students. He's the head of the Institute of Education in Manchester, and he had done a lot of research on this and came back with a whole series of factors. People with a university or college degree, more likely to vote, less likely to commit crime, less likely to drink alcohol, smoke less, live longer, etc., etc. Now, of course, anybody here could say, but are they the people who choose to go to university because they had those traits already? Or do they gain those traits when they go to university? Probably a little bit of both, actually, I suspect. And probably the biggest difference is made to the most disadvantaged students who would not gain those attributes from their home background and their home upbringing, but may gain those traits from university. Probably much less so from the more affluent students. So what is the value of UK universities to the economy? This is data from Universities UK, and as you'll see, they estimate the contribution of 265 billion a year. Some have argued that's a bit on the high side, but nevertheless, it's a significant number. You probably can't read it, but under social good, nurses, doctors, social workers, midwives, all in the health professions. There is indeed a very significant contribution of UK universities to the economy, and this is for about £18.6 billion spent, so that's a 14-to-1 return. You'd be very lucky to get a 14-to-1 return on most things, and even if it's a bit high, it's at least a 10-to-1. And it may not be that far off, because we do have the figure for my own university, University of Manchester. Annual income 1.3 billion. Incidentally, and I love to say this, that's more than either Manchester City Football Club, Manchester United Football Club, or Manchester Airports Group. Many things are measured in football in Manchester. But an independent analysis indicated that this total annual economic impact is over £7 billion a year, much of it regionally. And that's through secondary employment and various other things. I know the figure for Oxford is 15 billion. So it is a very, very significant contribution to the economy. So let's look at who's interested in universities. And just about everybody. I can't tell you, when you're a vice-chancellor, everybody wants to tell you how to run your university. And particularly parents, who are very, very exercised by the fact that when they want to know why Johnny failed his exam, I can't tell them why Johnny failed his exam because it's secret under GDPR. But of course, students and their families, prospective students, alumni, increasingly important in terms of philanthropy, our governing bodies, hanging over all that, the Office for Students. I couldn't go into that in more detail if you would like me to. Employees, funders, donors, regulators, governments, local and global communities, numerous. And in health, even more. Because, of course, we have the National Health Service, we have patients, carers, health authorities, academic health science centres, health innovation networks. And health is the most regulated part of the university sector. These are the only courses that are capped still. And we cannot recruit more into nursing, into dentistry and medicine than we did before. So that is a problem, and I understand why they're capped because of the cost, but you may have seen the Financial Times headline, UK medical students flock to Bulgaria amid scarcity of college places back home. I take flock in the context of a newspaper. I think it's a few hundred, but nevertheless, the point is we're not meeting demand. There was also a recent article showing that the number of students applying to do engineering has gone up dramatically, but universities can't take them. They're constrained by their lab space and by cost, because these are very, very high-cost subjects. So universities have been around for a long time, but I don't think there has ever been a time when there have been more drivers of change. Political, geopolitical, economic, societal, technological, legislative, and environmental. We are now expected to do ever more than we have done before. Of course, this is inevitable, but we're trying to do it on the same resource. But the biggest challenge we're facing at the moment as a sector, some universities more than others, is the financial challenge. And I want to just briefly explain why that is. And it's actually really simple. You don't have to be an economist to get it. In the past, UK student fees broke even. For a long period of time, they paid for what they cost. Research has always lost money, and international students subsidise research. Now, UK fees lose money. Research loses more money than ever, with less than 70% of full costs paid. And there is a decline in international students, and we're being asked to do ever more at greater costs. So we're asked to vet all our international students, check for any potential terrorism activity, do more on mental health for all of them. And this problem with research losing money is particularly serious in health because of the charities where we recover barely 20%, NIHR where we barely recover. So any university with a very big health activity, and I believe, I don't know if it's true, but it's quite likely that the problems at Dundee are because it has such a successful life and health sciences. And that loses a lot of money for them. But in terms of the student fee, you can see here the tracking of the fee when the £3,000 fee was introduced, and then the £9,000 fee, then it didn't keep up, but went up again, and now we're down here. The £9,500 fee will not even touch. In fact, it doesn't even account for the extra costs of national insurance. So, and nobody can see a way out of it at the moment because politically it's unacceptable to charge the full costs for students, particularly given the full costs are highest for the subjects we need most: medicine, engineering, dentistry, nursing to some extent. So there isn't an easy way out of it. But we also see that the high-cost subjects have fallen the most, a 15% decline since 2018-19 to 24-25. For example, a drop in international students of just 1% for the Russell Group is £50 million. That's just 1%. And remember, there have been dramatic changes in the visas that have caused a reduction in international students. So there are not easy solutions to this. And indeed, Another headline, again from the Financial Times, they seem to have it in for universities, probably not, was, has Britain finally fallen out of love with universities? I suspect not, but university applications were flat, but that's against a demographic bulge when they should have been up. They're up a bit this year, which is perhaps a good sign, but we're now going into a demographic decline, with predictions that by 2030 to 2040, we could see 20% reduction in the number of applications to study at university. Of course, has Britain finally fallen out of love with university? You might think so from some of the press. But actually, we are doing rather better than some of our counterparts. A recent US survey reported that 32% of those polled had little or no confidence in universities, and the remainder were not very much better. In the UK, the latest King's Policy Unit research said universities, in terms of trust, came only behind the NHS, the Armed Forces, and the Royal Family, which is not a bad place to be. 74% said that university research is essential, and 60% think UK universities are amongst the best in the world. That suggests quite a confidence from the public. But they also think it costs too much and vice-chancellors are paid too much, which there's another issue. So I'm not sure this headline is fair, but we are facing quite a significant demographic decline. And then, of course, there is the issue of international students. So a few years ago, there was a study done by PwC that looked at future finances of universities across the sector, and it predicted a decline. But many vice-chancellors at the time said, it'll be fine, we'll recruit lots more international students. I was at a conference where this was presented, and I said, goodness me, that's a triumph of optimism over reality, in my view. And of course, with the visa changes that were brought in, and remember there are a number of changes that have come in, the cost of the visas is one of the highest amongst our competitors. Not, when you take into account other costs like healthcare, the USA is probably, but compared to all of Europe, we're way, way higher. And then, of course, students were not allowed to bring dependents anymore, and that took a very big hit, particularly countries such as India. So we have seen a decline, and particularly in certain parts of the sector. So it's been pretty turbulent, and although you might think it's newer universities, perhaps not quite as prestigious, that are facing problems, actually, the research-intensive universities are facing problems because of this huge gap in research. So currently, the recovery of research costs, as I mentioned, is about 68%. That accounts to a gap of £5.3 billion a year, the vast majority of which is in the Russell Group, because they do a large proportion of the research. So this is also a challenge for some of our best universities, because they've got this big gap, and particularly, as I said, if it's in health. So we do seem to be being hit on every count at the present time. And I'll come back in a moment to, are there any solutions? Maybe, but maybe not palatable ones. But let me then just spend a few moments on other aspects of universities, which I think are particularly important. We are the key educators of the post-18 in the UK. Obviously, some students go on to further education colleges who have their own problems, I should say. But we're also facing lots of challenges. Are students customers or are they partners? How do we meet the costs of a university education now, particularly given the challenges that students are facing? How do we increase access to students from disadvantaged backgrounds, which means paying a lot in bursaries and other costs? How do we meet the expectation of students? And are there new models of education that we need to be looking at? Because we do largely run a 19th century education model. 3 years, big classes, still the same. Certainly true in medicine, dentistry, nursing. And I think we're going to have to change the way that we do it. And this is going to be a real challenge, because the students of the future are going to demand something different. They'll be local, they'll be distant, some of them will be global, some will be part-time. Now we have a lifelong learning entitlement. Some of them will be partnerships between different universities. There is almost no transfer of university students between institutions, almost none. very, very hard. Now, a lot of people have said, well, why don't we set up something like the California system? Clark Kerr, very famous, who set up an amazing system. With some universities, you're the research intensives, and you do PhDs, and you're the standard education, and you're the feeder colleges. We haven't, because of the autonomy of British universities. Nobody has the control to be able to do that. And given that autonomy is a good thing, then probably we don't want to go down that route. But we also need to meet the different expectations and wider skills. And here, I can't help but feel that AI and digital is going to play a huge role in the future. A good friend of mine, Dr. Gerald Chan, gave an inaugural lecture at Berkeley just recently, and he cited several, and it's on the web, it's worth going to look up, several interesting experiments at Stanford, at Harvard, and at Arizona State. Their experiments were, take cohorts of students who are taught in a big class, who are taught one-to-one with a personal tutor, and who are taught one-to-one with an AI agent. The ones with the personal tutor did the best, not a surprise, but that is just unsustainable. But the ones with the AI agent did way better than the ones just sitting in the big class. And he argues then that the role of the professor, the teacher, is to bring it to life, to discuss with them, what they learned from it, rather than standing up in front of 300 in a big classroom with students largely looking at iPads and not listening to the lecturer. And indeed, most lectures are recorded now, and so he reports that at Harvard, 600-person classes barely have 100 in them. So generative AI can be a really valuable teaching model that I think we're going to have to start to apply much more rigorously and open up as a way of providing what is clearly high-quality teaching. We're all a bit scared of AI, but actually the evidence is accumulating that it's an amazingly powerful tool if used well, and if students recognize the limitations. We say to students, yeah, sure, get ChatGPT to help you with your essay, but acknowledge where it helped you, and then critique it. Don't ignore it, because let's face it, we all use Wikipedia all the time, so it's not that different. So I think that we're going to have to embrace this in the future. I want to make a few particular comments about students in the health area, because the ever-escalating costs of training health professionals is a really problematic area. NHS costs, placements, time, particularly when their NHS is under pressure, we're finding that it's very hard to get devoted time to training health professionals, many of whom do not have AI skills and probably need it. And we also need to bring into the health professions more entrepreneurship. Just as the NHS needs digital and AI, our professions need it as well. Then, of course, on the other side, the flip side of it, we are facing a mental health crisis. They're very often highlighted in universities and cited as, goodness me, there's a cluster of suicides at University X. Actually, the number of suicides per population amongst university students is half that of the equivalent not at university. So that's still too many, of course, but it suggests that if you're at university, you're much less likely to commit suicide, partly because we all put such vast sums of money into mental health support, which you probably don't get if you're outside that. Then, of course, our other strand, universities and research. How do we get interaction? Many students will choose a university based on its prestige, and I'm afraid to say that prestige is largely based on research, certainly global prestige is. There are very few global measures of teaching quality. They have internal measures within the UK, such as the Student Satisfaction Survey, the Teaching Excellence Framework, but all the headlines are Oxford #1 again in the global league table, various global league tables. But research is changing, and it will need to deliver more in terms of economic growth. They are obviously interactive, teaching and research, and students come to those universities because they want to be taught by a leading researcher, somebody who's at the cutting edge, somebody who isn't just a good doctor, but somebody who is developing new medicines or new surgical approaches. They want to be right at the forefront of that, and that is not surprising. But again, lots of challenges in research and innovation, particularly in health. How much fundamental knowledge versus how much application? Patrick Vallance, who I know very well and gave this lecture last year, has argued we must protect fundamental research. Without it, we've got nothing to innovate and translate. And he is an ardent supporter of that. But he then says we also must have funding for research that can be applied to the government's core missions. And then we must support companies to do research. And by the way, the R&D spend of companies in the UK has gone down quite significantly while our competitors has gone up. And their spend on training has gone down, which is a problem. Individuals versus teams. All the esteem measures we have are individuals. Whether they're prizes or fellowships or whatever else, they are individuals. But we know, in health in particular, most is achieved by huge teams, particularly interdisciplinary teams. We are much more alert now, quite rightly so, to research culture and integrity. We're facing open publishing, which is costing a lot. And many areas of research in health have high infrastructure costs. Not just equipment, but actually energy. I'm on the Industrial Strategy Council, as Gillian mentioned. And one of the biggest things facing a lot of organisations is the cost of electricity. It's a massive issue for the UK at the moment. Then disciplines, core strengths versus the barriers of the disciplines. You know, it's all very well being focused in an ology, but that ology sometimes needs to work with another ology. And the question, which was addressed in Paul Nurse's review of universities versus institutes. It won't surprise you to hear I have quite a strong view on this as former Vice-Chancellor of a university. But when the Royce Institute was awarded to Manchester, I was asked how we wanted it to work. It could be independent on university soil, or it could be owned by the university. I said, well, you can have either model. You can put it on our land, we'll charge you for it, plenty. And if you want any support for HR, for finance, for legal, whatever, we'll charge you for it, and I will take no responsibility for its success. However, if it's part of the university, we'll supply all that, and I will be responsible. They chose the latter fairly quickly. But a big issue in research is risk versus certainty, and we tend to be very risk averse. I love this phrase from my colleague, Andre Geim, which, if you follow the trodden path, you might find all the grass has been eaten. And actually, we do have ARIA now, which is meant to be more mission-orientated, but taking more risks and chances than did. But most funders are inherently risk-averse. And before we all think, oh, that's because MRC is risk-averse, or Cancer Research UK, or British Heart Foundation is risk-averse. No, they're not. It's us. It's our peers. We are the people who decide who gets the money. We're the ones being resistant to it. So, you know, we have to be careful who we criticise here. Because, you know, it could be that we just need to find a way to take on more risk. Health, of course, there are the additional challenges of so many different funders. NIHR, all the charities, various other small organisations, in addition to MRC, BBSRC, all different. You've put an application even to one research council and you want to submit to another, you've got to rewrite it because it's completely different. Obviously, escalating costs, much more engagement now beyond traditional disciplines, for example, with engineering, physical sciences, social sciences, with arts, actually. I know MRC is working with the Arts and Humanities Research Council looking at the impacts of culture and arts on health. But the government is seriously looking at bureaucracy and delays, though it will be interesting to see how we cope with the abolition of NHS England. I'll make no further comment, but that is a task and a half. Good luck with that. But another big one is geography. The vast majority of funding for health goes to the southeast. Actually, this year, for the first time, MRC funded 50-50 in the southeast and the rest. Although if you take it per population, it's still way, way below. And yet, we know, where is poor health? It's in the north, every time. So this just shows, all you need to see is green, above average life expectancy for males and females, courtesy of my great colleague Luke Mumford, who's a health economist. Red is below. And you can cut it loads of different ways. And yet the health funding is not largely going to those regions. And maybe we could argue that it doesn't need to do, but one feels that it probably should do. And this has big implications because what Luke's also demonstrated, well, this was from ESRC work, that in those regions, the economically inactive, long-term sick or disabled, are a huge proportion in these regions. In fact, he calculated that 30% of the gap in productivity between the south and the north is poor health. The economic implications of that are huge, actually, if you could manage to deal with it. And I saw data the other day suggesting that if we could even improve health somewhat, the economic impact would dwarf anything else that the Industrial Strategy Council can do. So one of the things we are now doing more of is working with industry, innovation, invention, research and discovery, spin-out companies, looking much more at the employment of our graduates, looking to seek foreign investment. And in 2014-15, the calculation then was UK universities contributed about 100 billion a year to GDP. That's lower than the figure from the UK, but on the other hand, it was 10 years ago. So, and they employ at least 840,000 people. So this is, an important contributor to the UK, not only economy, but well-being as well. But universities as businesses, well, we're not businesses, we're charities, we're independent charities with authority passed from the Charity Commission down to the Office for Students. Very few are private organisations. But on the other hand, having been a Vice-Chancellor for 14 years, you have to be really pretty business-like in running an organisation of that size. You have to watch all your finances, all your risks, all your income. We have to improve efficiencies, and we are doing that. But I worry at the moment that it's likely, the prediction is there will be 10,000 jobs lost in the higher education sector this year. You'll have seen the hundreds of redundancies being reported, in some places multiple hundreds. One university north of the border, a quarter of its staff are going to go, and that's to meet the pressures on cost. And the worry with this is, even if they're not going to go bankrupt, which they may not do, hopefully not, it does tend to be a downward spiral. And it's not good to be cutting huge numbers of jobs. If you're a student, you see the university you want to go to, oh, suddenly cut 300 jobs, you might think, maybe I won't go there then, because my teacher might not be there. So this is really a concern. But we are getting a lot better at innovation and application. We've woken up to the fact that we need to work with industry. Used to be a view at industry, it's only good if it's going to give us a load of money. But actually now we value that collaboration with industry. We value IP. There was a very good review of IP done by Irene Tracy, the Vice-Chancellor of Oxford, which came out with recommendations which have been signed up to by pretty much every university in the country. So I think we are getting much better at looking at efficiencies, looking at savings, looking at working with industry. But I love this quote from a former colleague when I was on the board of AstraZeneca. Don't turn great universities into second-rate companies. And I think that's very, very fair, actually. We have to be careful that we don't go too far down the commercialisation route, because we are places of fundamental discovery. So getting that balance right is going to be tough, actually. Last few slides to comment on impact. We now, of course, have to return to the Research Excellence Framework on impact. And that's great. And I think it's appropriate. And my colleague down here, Brian Cox, still almost impossible to get into physics in Manchester. It's interesting, he does first-year lectures on quantum mechanics. We've got 200 students in the physics cohort. The first few lectures have 600 students in it. But they quickly dwindle away as they realise this is serious quantum mechanics. But impact from our application, commercial partnerships, public engagement, which, as you heard, has been a passion of mine for a long time. So I think we are all starting to think much more about where is our impact going to be. We're also thinking a lot more about what can we do for industry, entrepreneurship, and there's a very good paper, do have a look at it, from the Russell Group. Not saying, government, give us loads of money. Give us a little bit of money, of course, mainly for the Higher Education Innovation Fund, which the data suggests it has a 20-to-1 return, which is pretty good, actually. But more, what we can do for you. And I think we are now getting into the mindset of what we can do. We have hugely valuable services, labs. When there's a shortage of labs in the UK for companies, we can start to provide them. We can start to have more flexibility between industry and universities. We've, for a number of years now, had what we call professors of practice. These are people who would not get a professorship on a standard academic route, but they might have had a commercial role, they might be doing something practical, and they're hugely valuable, actually. We have quite a lot of honorary professors from industry, and that they love. They get to be called professor, and they get access to our library. I mean, what could be better than that? So trying to get, more thought into how we do this better. But then, of course, universities and wider communities. Deering said in 2002, just as castles provided the source of strength for medieval towns and factories, in the industrial age, universities are the source of strength and the knowledge-based economy of the 21st century. Somebody I know quite well, Joe Berridge, who is one of the most acclaimed city planners from Toronto, he said, what any city region needs to be successful is an international airport and a good university, ideally with a medical school, which bodes well, I suspect, for some. And we heard all the terms, universities, the multiversity, anchor institutions, political contributions. I'm really fortunate that in Manchester we have a very close relationship with regional government involved in every aspect of planning, whether it's environmental sustainability or skills or finance or entrepreneurship. So that has really been important, I think, and I realise it's not quite the case everywhere. Then another area we've taken much more seriously recently is what's often termed social responsibility. This has been a core goal of the University of Manchester for over 10 years. And a lot of it is manifest in what do we teach, what students do we produce, but also additional addressing global challenges, wider contribution to societies. We have a large community panel from the poorest districts of Manchester that come in regularly and tell us what we should be doing, mostly what we shouldn't be doing, and how they can engage with us. And that's helped a lot by having cultural institutions. We have, for example, John Bank Discovery Centre and John Rylands and so on. But I think engagement with our local communities is going to be ever more important. So what are universities for? Let me come back to that before I finish. I think we are some of the few places where there can be out-of-the-box thinking, where there can be constructive challenge. You can make unlikely connections. We have something called Creative Manchester. They had an event the other day with our experts in Japanese and in religion. I said, what was all that about? Apparently, they're using culture to deliver religious teaching in Japan. Fine, good. I think they can be the conscience of society. I've mentioned the challenges of being politically neutral, but I think that is important. So, I should have called this, are there any palatable or affordable solutions? Because the list would then be very short, I'm afraid. With lots of money, we could solve the problems, of course, of universities. Government could put more money into teaching, particularly in high-cost subjects. They could fund research better. They could make concessions on visas and so on. So, and I put these up, some of them as questions, and would welcome input from any of you. So on skills, I think we have a big job to do around recruitment, retention, and retraining. Talking about loan forgiveness for the key professions, nursing being one, a very important one. I would argue that adapting visa costs to be a little more in line with our competitors wouldn't cost that much money, but would actually help universities enormously. We are going to have to adapt to AI. There is the only way I can see in terms of skills. I think we're also going to have to be more flexible in our skills. Some of you will have seen that in Canada, in Ontario, they're trialling a 4-year medical degree for GP only. Now, can we do that? Review of Physicians Associates. Will that be successful or not? Are there other models we can think of? Because we can't keep doing things the same way, because we're just going to go in a downward spiral. Research, there is an argument that there are too many places doing research. I was going to put up the question, do we have too many universities? I think a better question is, do we have too many universities trying to do the same things? And I think that is a more valid question. I suspect that the sector will have to accept that research needs to be better costed, but in return, it will have to be at a lower volume. I just don't think we can make up that 5 billion easily. So I think that will be a trade-off. I think we could do with trying to get the medical charities and NIHR to try and align a little better. They do work together now, and I know MRC is working with a lot of them, and they work with NIHR, but it sometimes feels like there's just, where do I go to for this? You know, Wellcome Trust, massive. And I know Wellcome seems more recently much more keen to engage. So I do think we could do more on that. On innovation, one of the big focuses of the Industrial Strategy Council is access to finance, and not just getting finance, but getting it quickly and for long term. Because health, you don't solve things quickly. You don't need money for 2 years, you need it for 10 years or more. And that is very difficult. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about pension funds and about potentially driving, and that's occupying a lot of our time at the moment. I'm also on a group led by the National Centre for Universities on Business as to how we can stimulate business R&D spend, because it is low at the present time, and any suggestions or ideas would be welcome in that. And just tell you briefly, the Industrial Strategy Council is particularly focused around things that matter to many of you: skills, innovation, access to finance, regulation, place, government interactions, and is working very hard at the moment to try and get to a position, but it will be hard because the last industrial strategy was in 2017. We're now in a very, very different fiscal environment to that we were in 2017. We just haven't got a lot of money to throw around. On finance, I suspect we will see more university mergers and federations. But having been part of the merger, the biggest merger of UMIST and the Victoria University in Manchester, they are not cheap and they are not easy. They take a huge amount of time. And even years later, you find the two IT systems are really not been integrated because it was just going to cost too much, so they don't quite talk to each other. You suddenly find a group of people on a different contract. So, and obviously there's been City St George's. I'd be as a alum of St George's, honorary alum, I'd be interested to hear how it's going, but it probably needs a year or two. The merger in Manchester was a great success, but gosh, it was hard, very, very hard. So I don't think we should think that this is going to be a panacea. I think we're going to have to fight for more teaching funds for subjects that where we desperately need skills. And this would be particularly health, computer science, AI, engineering, where there are real shortages. I would personally like to see research and higher education come under the same government department. We're split, of course, at the moment between DCIT for research and the Department for Education for education. And that split happened a number of years ago, and I don't think it's particularly helpful to us. There may be other solutions, and I'd love to hear them, but I'm just going to close with hopefully a little more upbeat. I think the future of universities is pretty bright, but we will need to diversify. We'll need some consolidation, and we'll need to be more adaptable and flexible than we've ever been in the past. But we have to remember what we're there for and rigorously defend the core missions and values of what universities should do, which is value to the public. Thank you very much indeed.
We've now got some time for questions, and I think, Nancy, you and I could sit down if we wished.
Oh, right,
okay,
yeah.
Should we do that?
Yeah, I'll leave those there.
And if someone could manage to put a bit more light on the stage, that would be good. I'm going to turn, right, we've got mics. Are they working okay?
Yep.
Excellent.
Yep, good.
That's a start, isn't it? That's a start. I turn to the audience in a moment, and I'm told that you can ask questions on Slido. Ooh. But I'm very happy for you to just put your hand up if that would be better. But I'm going to start, actually. I'm going to start. Lovely to hear about Manchester, because I've been in Manchester for the last 2 days, actually with a group of researchers from around the world. And they were all worried about the same thing, especially the person from Canada and the person from Denmark. And that was
nobody from
President
USA?
Trump. President Trump, because of his thinking about research. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about what he's going to do to the UK.
It's me, I wouldn't like to predict. I mean, it's sad to say this, but it is an opportunity for the UK, as I think a number of people are feeling concerned about the future of research in the USA. The problem is it's at a time when many universities haven't got the wherewithal to recruit them. So I'm urging some of the funders to create funds that we can perhaps
used would be the wrong word, but maximise this opportunity that we face. That's probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But yeah, it's not great in the States at the moment.
No, it's not. Anybody like to kick off from the audience? There's a cluster down here, so if you could pass the mic, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Hello, Dame Nancy, thank you very much indeed. That was fascinating. For me, the most important thing, or the most interesting thing, was the North-South divide and distribution of research funding. But my question is about medical schools and medical school training. You touched on this several times. I happen to know the figures that last 2024, we trained in this country 9,200, just over, new doctors, and we imported or recruited from abroad 19,000, just over 19,000. In other words, we recruited more than twice the number of doctors than we trained. And that is, I think, a national disgrace. The last time we trained more doctors than we imported was 2017. And during that time, tens of thousands of British students have, with the correct A-level grades and aptitude, have failed to get into medical school. And I was wondering if you had any comments about that, please.
Yeah, so it is dreadful. And it's dreadful not just for us, it's dreadful for the places we're recruiting from. Yeah, same as nursing. I know some of the big trusts, they go to the Philippines to recruit all their nurses. Well, that's not good for the Philippines, is it? So unless we can increase the numbers of medical students, we're never going to be able to solve that. The problem, of course, is not so much the universities, although it is expensive training a medical student for the preclinical years, it's the clinical costs. That's where the big hit comes, and can we get the placements? But I would argue we do need to increase the number of places now because it's become so bad. The other problem, and you'll probably know this much better than me, is we're losing the people from the profession as well. So as I've been talking to the Department for Education about potential loan forgiveness for key professionals, can we have incentives? So it's bad at both ends at the moment. It'll be interesting to see what GHSC comes out, no longer NHS England, we'll soon be looking at the life sciences strategy for the UK, and I know that skills is a real worry, and particularly, and I should have mentioned this, clinical academics. That is a big worry, that we just don't have enough good it's hard enough training medicine and getting through, but then being an academic as well is really difficult. So I think we've just got to make it a bit easier.
Yeah. There were a few hands in that little group, weren't there? So perhaps pass it behind. I can see Parveen Kumar, I think. I forgot to bring my glasses, but I can see you, Parveen.
Yes, I think you got me right. Dame Nancy, that was a lovely talk and really a wonderful overview of really what's going on with education and research and various things. The two things, I mean, apart from the financial side, which clearly is a huge problem, the two other things that really sort of got me, one was you said duplication, and the other was mergers. Now, the problem with mergers is they can merge, but it's never cost effective, I was reckoning, because it actually often costs more money even after they settle down. And in terms of duplication, were you suggesting that we had sort of universities just on engineering or just on medicine?
No.
Rather like the Russians?
No, definitely not. No, because then you lose the value of the interactions between nursing and engineering. Actually, in the end, the merger in Manchester saved money in the long term. I think largely through savings on back office function, which took a long time to realise because we guaranteed no compulsory redundancies at merger. But then over time, 700 roles were lost, but as all the administrations were merged. So it did save money in the end. But it took a long time. It's not a quick fix.
There's a hand in the front, I think it's Martin, but and then I ought to look further afield, so I will look at the back of the, I was going to say back of the class, back of the
yes, well, like everyone else, thank you for an outstanding talk. It's not entirely inconceivable that after some future election in the United Kingdom, we couldn't have a British version of Donald Trump and Elon Musk in 10 and 11 Downing Street. So
we almost did at one time, some would
indeed,
argue.
and if that did happen, should British universities be preparing? Should they be reflecting on their resilience? And do you think that British universities would publicly uphold their mission and values as you called on them to do, given that so few seem to be doing it in the United States at the minute?
Yeah, I think it very much depends on just how bad it is, because at the moment, a lot of universities in the US are just too frightened because they can just have the axe come down. I mean, losing indirect costs going from 60% to 15%, that's fine for the very wealthy ones, which it was targeted at, by the way, because Trump administration is furious about the fact that US universities have bank balances that are bigger than many countries. But of course, it's impacting all of them and the other cuts. So I find it hard to imagine, maybe I'm just optimist, that we could go that far in terms. I mean, look at the different surveys. US population, 32% desperately unhappy with universities, and another 30% pretty unhappy. 74% of our population value universities. So I think we are in a different climate. I don't think we can be complacent, though. I think we need to be thinking about the what-ifs, because most of Europe's going fairly right-wing now. So I think we could go down a different route.
Any more questions? I said I'd look in a different corner. So the gentleman in the red, orange jumper. Would you mind saying who you are? And there's a microphone for you there.
I'm Jim Archer, and I'm wondering if it's possible to educate academics a bit more in the way that businesses work. I ask this because I happen to have a close relative whose job it was to look for grants to fit businesses in Scotland to how the university could help them so they could set up PhD students who would help them and so on. And he was furious when he got his grant application turned down because the businesses all liked them and the academics came up with amazing reasons for not accepting them.
Yeah, I'm not too surprised. How long ago was it?
It was about 2 years ago. He came up with this.
I was going to say it's got better. But 2 years ago is not very long, actually, so it's obviously not got much better. Yeah, it is a problem. And it's not true of all academics. We have a lot more now who are quite entrepreneurial, who are willing to fit with business interests. I think you've got to pick quite carefully who you go to. So, if we've got a big company coming in and saying we want to work on this, I know exactly the people who will jump at it. And the ones who, no, don't go near them. But yeah, we do try. But also, the other problem for universities and businesses is timescales. Businesses normally work on much, much shorter timescales than universities are used to. What's helped in one of the big areas where we have interaction with industry is on, not surprisingly, on graphene. And what we did was appointed quite a number of professors of practice who are from business backgrounds, and quite a number of people who are not academics but can deliver on a project for 6 months, then move on to another project. Because otherwise an academic says, why should I change what I'm doing now for 6 months, because I can't afford to and I won't get anything out of it. So I think probably need some different models as well as education.
But you made a comment, I think, didn't you, about universities not going too far down the business model and being poor companies.
Yes, and I think we need to stick to, we are good at this. We've also got to be good at working with people who are good at other things, and businesses are good at other things.
Gentleman in the middle, towards the back there. If we go there, then I will come back, because I know I missed some others.
There's one down at the front.
And there's one down there. Okay, I'll come to you next.
I'm Michael Isuma. Yes, I want to come back on the slide of where you were talking about 141 universities in the UK. You classified you said 46 medical schools, the Russell Group universities. I want to know, and during your presentation, throughout your presentation, you said that universities in the UK are not businesses, they are charities. So I want to know whether Russell Group universities are a specific group of universities, not including medical schools, or whether Russell is a charity that owns many universities in the UK, and whether there are other charities like the Russell Group owning universities in the UK.
Okay. No, the Russell Group is an alliance of the willing, largely. It's not a formal structure as such. It's just 24 universities that work together closely. They're all independent charities, all independent organisations. All but one has a medical school. Is that right, Tim? All but one has a medical school? Two. Okay, all but two have a medical school. But it's a grouping, like the Alliance Group. It's a mission group, if you like. Largely research intensive, largely self-determined, but it's not a formal, different set of universities.
Didn't they used to meet at the Russell Hotel?
Yes, it did indeed. That's how it was founded. Indeed. Yes, it did. That's how it got its name. It was as complicated as that.
And we've got the microphone at the front, I think, have we?
I still have the last part of my question, please.
Yeah.
Why did those 24 universities merge to form the Russell Group?
No, they didn't merge at all. There is no merger at all. They're all completely independent. They just came together as a group that was similar, that were particularly focused on research, that shared ideas. It's not a formal merger in any way, shape or form.
Okay. So they are the only universities group like that, the Russell Group. There is no other group like the Russell Group with many independent universities in the UK.
I don't think there are any other groups.
Well, there's the Mission Alliance, yeah, there are other groups, yeah, that come together, that form groups. There's one or two come and gone, but like-minded universities do come together into mission groups when they've got similar views.
Thank you.
I'm going to take another question in the front.
Thank you, Nancy. My question relates to the point you made about the value of health to the economy and the sort of economic gain that the nation can achieve from having a healthy workforce. I just wondered what your thoughts were on how universities can do a better job of articulating that argument.
I think we could shout about it more. I think the work of health economists, like the work I showed you, people are still shocked that 30% of the gap in productivity is health. Imagine, and there's going to be a report coming out soon that will be hundreds of billions lost on health. We've got something called health inequalities, because it is largely social deprivation, most of it. The reason why the big cities of the north are less healthy. But it's also access, digital divide, healthcare not going out to them, not feeling a part of it. So it's a huge, and this is where health and social scientists need to work together on what are ways to solve it. We started something years ago, and it's been across the country, I think now, called the lung bus, that went into the poorest districts in the region and said, if you've had a cough for 3 weeks, pop in and have a low-dose CT scan. And it shifted the diagnosis of lung cancer from stage 3, 4 to stage 1, 2. Just doing that. And so there are other things, but they're hard. You go on. We've got another one at the front.
I think we've got another one at the front. Yes, you've got the
I'm
microphone.
going to ask a related question. You commented on entrepreneurship, innovation, and how there's a lot of substance in the UK university environment. And you also mentioned there's also a culture of risk aversion. And how can the system better kind of have a better growth mindset, embrace more risk to kind of grow those ideas in a more robust way?
I think several ways. I think many universities now have quite strong entrepreneurship training for students. An awful lot of students want to start companies, actually, but they need help and support to do it, and they need training. And some of the companies started by the students, it might be a physicist with somebody from the business school, because they need somebody to write their business case. I think hiring more academics that are more entrepreneurial, and again, a lot of universities are starting to do this. Obviously, a lot of startups come out of universities. MRC over the last 10 years, I think it is, £10 billion back on startup companies. Big numbers. So I think we are doing it. Universities are tough ships to turn now, I have to tell you. I went to a very famous old university a number of years ago, and I asked a senior professor. She was a professor of medieval history, but even so. I said, how do you like the Vice-Chancellor's changes? She said, well, I don't. I said, what don't you like about them? She said, well, I haven't read them, but I don't need to. We don't need to change at all. And that is not an unusual view among some academics, I have to say.
We have a student section at the RSM, and they're very good. They put lots of webinars on, and they're very interested in entrepreneurship.
Yeah,
That's why I mentioned
they
it.
are. Yeah, you often get it in younger.
Yeah. So we've got a few more minutes, but there's a hand vaguely around here, isn't there? Oh yes. Oh no, it's gone. You've missed.
Back again.
Back
then
again.
one in red.
Back again. Yeah. If we could, brilliant. Pass it along. Thank you very much.
Hi, Nicola Stingerlin. A quick follow-up question from the speaker a few seconds ago. Would it help if we would look at universities and education as a public health intervention, as a thrust, because it's clear after COVID, etc. Do you see what I mean? Because we know that education is great for health. Is there any way that we could change the dialogue a bit to say education is good for health, it's a public health intervention, to swing the funding a bit?
In theory, yes, we do try, not always successfully. The difficulty at the moment is nobody's really got any money, so it's quite difficult. But I think absolutely yes, and public health in particular, I think is a big area that we need to drive more into.
Couple more questions. There's a hand at the back there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Orange.
Speaking about the money just now, what is your contribution or integration in the Gulf? We haven't heard about this, like universities like King's, University College and stuff like that. I'm sure you are getting like financial input from them. That's one. Second, how do people say, for example, for economic reason, they went to Dubai or they live in Dubai and then they join King's College. Are they considered to be graduate of UK graduate and they can come straight away joining medical school here? How does it work?
So we do not have a university outside. We don't have a campus outside, but we do have centres. One is in Dubai. My understanding is the King's model, if you study in Dubai, you get a King's degree, is my understanding. Manchester, won't surprise you to hear, gains a very large amount of income from Abu Dhabi. There's a small word football involved in that. That's helped us considerably, but they've invested heavily. And there's a lot of British universities with outposts in the Middle East. We've never chosen to go down that route, but we do have centres.
We could probably take one. Oh, here.
Thank you very much. I was just interested particularly in what you were saying about the overlap between universities and the question of are there too many or how are they going to manage that? And I'm just wondering if, just as we're seeing more patient-centeredness in healthcare generally, whether we're going to see more student-centeredness in universities so that a student might be based, say, at Manchester, but would do modules that they chose from Harvard or Leiden or Edinburgh. And they might choose to do their dissertation with a researcher who's interested in their particular topic in Cambridge. Whether they're then going to have, a placement in industry that's offered by yet a different university.
Yeah. There's been a lot of discussion about it. It's really hard though because of curriculum alignment, and that's one of the reasons there is not ready transfer. So. I talked to another university, I won't name it, about having nursing transfer because they offer a much less academic nursing degree. And we have some of our nursing students who don't like the very academic degree. You know, they study chemistry in the first year. And equally, this other university has some that turn out to be real stars, but it's never come off, partly because of the curriculum alignment, partly because the other university felt they'd lose better students. So it is quite difficult. Many students do placements now, of course, in all disciplines. Engineering, nearly all the students do placements, but they're normally industrial placements. But some can go to an overseas university, so quite a lot of our students will go and spend a year in China, for example, as a different educational experience, or go and spend a few months in Harvard. So it does happen, but it's not easy. Julian's going somewhere.
Thought I'd go over here as an indication that we are drawing this to a close, and then we can go and enjoy the drinks out in the atrium. I want to do a vote of thanks. Four thanks, particularly, starting with the Jephcott family, again, for your generous support. Importantly, second, the staff. It is a huge amount of work to make these events happen. So thanks to those of you in the room, and pass on the message to those that aren't. It's a huge amount of work and vital to these events happening. And of course, thanks to you all for coming. But most importantly, thank you to Nancy, Dame Nancy Rothwell, for the insightful talk into the benefits that UK universities bring. I really wasn't aware of the amount of money that's attached to universities. I mean, I knew there was some, but I didn't think there was quite as much as you've explained. And the challenges they face. You know, the impact of AI is going to be fascinating. I don't think we can have a lecture in the RSM at the moment without AI coming into it in one way or another. We are very much on a tipping point, I think, in terms of that change. But I'm so glad that you ended on a bright note. You ended talking about a bright future, and that the universities will have to adapt and be flexible. And it sounds rather like Darwin. It'll be the survival of the fittest, whatever that means. So at this point, I have got another medal. It's the evening of the medals. This is the Jephcott medal, which I must now award you. And also, just in case you, well, I hope you've got something that you can carry this home in. Beautiful. Hopefully not going home on the tube. Yeah. Right. So thanks again. Drinks out there. Thank you all for coming.